natural to clamp down more forcefully, tightly concentrating the mind. You can see this in the facial expressions of people who try to concentrate in this way. Their lips become pursed, their eyebrows draw together, and their foreheads become furled with wrinkles. They're becoming concentrated, but like orange juice, most of the fluidity is being drained from their minds. If you want to concentrate for a short time and don't mind the side effects of tension and fatigue, you can follow the above strategy. But if you want to follow the path of Shamatha, you'll need an alternative. I had to discover this fact through experience. During my first extended Shamatha retreat, I was filled with enthusiasm. I wanted to take full advantage of the rare opportunity that was before me, for I was meditating in India under the guidance of the Dalai Lama. I had no financial worries, my material needs were easily met. All I had to do was put the instructions into practice. I threw myself into this training with all my might. Each morning I would rise at 3:30, except once I slept in until 3:45 and got upset with myself for slacking off. Enthusiastic I was, but so uptight. The Tibetan manuals on Shamatha meditation that I had studied over the years stated that the type of attention needed when one began such practice was, quote, highly focused. So I tried as hard as I could to keep my mind from wandering. Within a matter of a few weeks, devoting many hours each day to meditation, I could sustain my attention on my chosen object for up to half an hour. I was elated by making such fast progress. As the weeks went by, however, I found myself becoming more and more fatigued. I was draining myself both physically and mentally. My joy in the practice was diminishing accordingly, and I felt my attention was not developing any further. What was wrong? I was trying too hard. The cultivation of Shamatha involves balancing the mind, and that includes balancing the effort exerted in practice with relaxation. I think this points to a cultural difference between traditional Tibetans living in the highlands of Tibet and modern people leading fast-paced lives. Their senses constantly bombarded by telephones, email, the media and noise. Years of such existence conditioned the nervous system and mind in ways that might have been considered torture in rural Tibet. One traditional Tibetan doctor whom I know once commented on people living in the West. So now he's quoting the Tibetan doctor who says, "From the perspective of Tibetan medicine, you are all suffering from nervous disorders. But given how ill you are coping remarkably well." Whether we dwell in Boston, Buenos Aires, Berlin or Beijing, our minds are conditioned to be more high-strung and engaged in compulsive thinking than the minds of Tibetan nomads and farmers living a century ago. So when Tibetan meditation manuals advise beginners to focus their attention firmly, the instructions are aimed at a very different reader than the average city dweller in the 21st century. Before we can develop attentional stability, we first need to learn to relax. And I know this from my own experience and again talking to many, many people. So relax, 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 relax. So we have these three qualities of relaxation, stability, clarity. And the relationship of these three qualities is a little bit like the analogy of a tree. That if we want a big, strong tree, first the tree has to, of course, sink deep roots. Without deep roots, the tree, a bit of wind comes, it'll fall over. So similarly, if we don't first sink deep roots of relaxation, a little bit of turbulence will come, we'll fall over, our whole practice will fall over. So first sinking deep roots of relaxation, that will, of course, help to support the trunk of stability. The stronger the trunk of stability, the higher the branches and leaves of clarity can grow. So these three qualities are the basis of each other. So the relaxation is the basis of stability, stability the basis of clarity. So we need to emphasize them in this order. Objects. So The general recommendation here in Shamatha, of course, is use the object that works best for you. And probably for many of us, that will be the breath, because it's quite easy to focus on, and it gets us out of our discursive conceptual mind into the body and gets us into the present moment. And there are three variations. We are looking at the full body, which we've done a little bit already, the abdomen, which we're going to introduce shortly, and then a little bit later today, the practice of focusing at the nostrils. And then tomorrow we're going to look at observing the mind as the object for Shamatha practice. Again, many of you will probably find this more challenging than focusing on the breath, but enormous benefits using the mind. Because if we can really develop the ability in meditation to observe our thoughts and emotions, then we can be free of them. And instead of being the slaves of our mind, we can really become the masters of our own mind. And then the following day we're going to look at this practice of resting in awareness. Again, a lot of benefit for us in the modern world, because it can really give us this sort of new default mode in daily life. Instead of having a tight, constricted, reactive mind, we can have an open, spacious mind of stillness as our default mode in daily life. And then actually on day 5, what we're going to do is we're going to combine these two practices, the mind and awareness, in a practice I call stillness in motion. And that also has its own advantages, and we'll look at that on day 5. So they're the objects we're going to be using in this Shamatha training, in this retreat. So let's now have a look at what tools we're going to use. So for this we can use your handout, the booklet. We can look at the diagram here, the Shamatha diagram. So the two main tools we use in this practice are what's called mindfulness and introspection. Mindfulness is a translation of the Sanskrit term smrti or the Pali term sati. And both of those two words literally mean memory, to remember. So mindfulness is our ability to remember the object. In other words, it's our ability to hold the object, to not forget it, to not become distracted. And the analogy here, in the diagram, you see the meditator down the bottom, and in the left hand is a rope. That rope is symbolizing mindfulness. So we are tying our mind with the rope of mindfulness to the object. So we're holding the object with the rope of mindfulness. But we need a second tool, and the second tool is introspection. And introspection is quality control. So introspection's job is to monitor the mindfulness. How is our mindfulness going? Are we still holding the object, or are we starting to become distracted or dull? So it's quality control. And of course, if we become dull or distracted, to bring the mind back to the object. And so the symbolism here in the right hand, you see the meditator has a hook in their right hand. That's to hook the mind back when we notice we become dull or distracted. So these are the two main tools that we use in our practice of Shamatha. And mindfulness we can define as the faculty of sustaining voluntary attention continuously upon a familiar object without forgetfulness or distraction. Introspection, quality control, is the faculty of monitoring the mind, recognizing the occurrence of dullness and distraction. And these are defined also, we see in very well in Alan Wallace's book on Attention Evolution on page 79. So let's see what he says there. He's quoting some of the Buddhist masters on this. First, he's quoting Buddha Gosa, who's a great Theravada Buddhist master from the 5th century. He said, Buddha Gosa drew this distinction between mindfulness and introspection. And he's quoting him here. He says, mindfulness has the characteristic of remembering. Its function is not to forget. It's manifested as guarding. Introspection has the characteristic of non-confusion. Its function is to investigate. It is manifested as scrutiny. And then Al says, and his contemporary Sangha, who's another great Indian Buddhist master from the 5th century, he says, mindfulness and introspection are taught, for the first prevents the attention from straying from the meditative object, while the second recognises that the attention is straying. And then he says, throughout Buddhist literature, the training in shamatha is often likened to training a wild elephant. And that's the symbolism here, is that the elephant is our mind. It's like a wild elephant. And the two primary instruments for this are the rope of mindfulness and the hook of introspection. So he's using the same analogy we see in this chart here. We'll be looking at this, starting to look at this chart in more detail this evening. And then one more thing he says here, Buddhist psychology classifies introspection as a form of intelligence, and its development has long been an important element of Buddhist meditation. A similar mental faculty, usually called metacognition, is now coming under the scrutiny of modern psychologists. Cognitive researchers have defined metacognition as knowledge of one's own cognitive and affective processes and states, as well as the ability to consciously and deliberately monitor and regulate those processes and states. This appears to be an especially rich area for collaborative research between Buddhist contemplatives and cognitive scientists. And we see this now in a lot of more modern therapies coming from science, cognitive science and so forth, using a lot of this idea about mindfulness and introspection to monitor the mind, to observe the mind in these therapies. So, as Alan Walsh said, I think there's a rich area of collaborative research going on there between Buddhism and psychology, certainly in the last 5 or 10 years. Let's now look at the second of the shamatha practices, the focusing on the breath at the abdomen. So what we're focusing on here, of course, is the rising and lowering of the abdomen as we breathe, the sensations of that. So again, just to briefly introduce that, I'll read a little bit from Tension Revolution before we go to the practice. So this is on page 31. He says, begin this session as you did before, by settling your body in its rest state, imbued with the 3 qualities of relaxation, stillness and vigilance. So vigilant posture, of course, is to keep the back straight, relaxed body, and once you've established that posture, to keep the body as still as possible, to avoid any unnecessary fidgeting or movement in the meditation. And then he says, with your awareness permeating the tactile sensations throughout your body, take 3 slow, deep breaths, observing the sensations of the breath filling your torso from the belly up to the chest. So again, he's using that breathing exercise of taking 3 deep breaths at the beginning. That can be helpful also for relaxing the body, but also to release any agitation in the mind as well. Then he says, then let your respiration return to its natural rhythm, and simply be present with the breath for several minutes, breathing as effortlessly as you can. With this preparation, you establish a basis in relaxation. Without losing this sense of ease, now shift your emphasis to the cultivation of attentional stability. This is the ability to sustain the focus of your attention without becoming fragmented or derailed by the force of distracting thoughts and sensations. With this aim, instead of being mindful of the various sensations of the breath throughout your whole body, focus your attention on the sensations of the expansion and contraction of your abdomen with each in and out breath. So that's what we're going to be focusing on in this meditation, the sensations of the rising and lowering of the abdomen as we breathe. And then we'll add one more thing here that you may find very helpful. And he says the following: out of sheer habit, unintentional thoughts are bound to cascade through your mind like a waterfall. One way of stemming this relentless stream of thoughts is to count the breaths. Try that now by counting 1 at the beginning of your first inhalation, then attending closely to the sensations of the breath throughout the rest of the inhalation and entire exhalation. Count 2 at the beginning of the next breath, and continue this way for as long as you find it helpful. Let these mental counts be brief, so that your attention to the counting doesn't override your awareness of the breath itself. The objective of counting of the breath is to insert brief reminders into the practice, remembering to remember, so that you don't get carried away by distracting thoughts. Attending to these mental markers at regular intervals in the course of the breath is like taking milestones on the side of a country road, letting you know by their presence that you're on the right track, or by their absence you've wandered off your chosen route. So what we're going to do partway through this meditation is we're going to introduce counting the breath. Counting the breath is not part of the standard practice, but as a beginner you may find it helpful, because as a beginner in this practice, what happens usually is we get distracted a lot. We just keep getting distracted. One way to help avoid getting heavily distracted is to count the breath. Because if you're counting the breath, you're occupying the mind so that it's not going to get caught up in other distractions. And what we're going to do in this practice, and there are many ways of counting, is we're going to count at the end of the in-breath. So at the end of the in-breath, you mentally note 1. Then you focus on the sensations of the rising and lowering of the abdomen through the following out-breath and then the following in-breath. At the end of the next in-breath, mentally note 2. And we're going to count from 1 up to 10 and then go back to 1 and keep doing that. If at any time you lose the count, simply go back to 1. So we're going to, partway through the meditation, we're going to experiment with counting the breath to see if you find it helpful to avoid getting distracted. Some people find counting the breath very helpful, some people find it not so helpful. And so then if you do find it helpful, then later you can bring it in when you need it. If you don't find it helpful, you can simply leave it out. So that's the practice we're going to do now. So let's do another 20-minute session. And we'll focus on the area of the abdomen, and this emphasis here, of course, is on stabilising attention, but of course on the basis of relaxation. Setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. Using the out-breath to relax and release any tightness or tension in any part of the body. Softening and relaxing all the muscles in the face. In this way, allowing the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. Allowing the breathing to flow naturally and effortlessly. And setting the mind in a state of ease and relaxation. Simply allowing the mind to come to rest in the present moment. And simply becoming aware of the rhythm of the breath. Noticing if it's slow or fast, deep or shallow, long or short. Now narrow your focus and focus on the sensations of breath in the area of the abdomen. Focusing on the sensations of the rising and lowering of the abdomen as you breathe. distracted from the breath, remember the first thing to do is simply relax. Then release the distraction and very gently return to focusing on the breath in the area of the abdomen. So relax, release and return. If you find yourself falling into dullness and drowsiness, then the first thing we can do is refresh our interest in the practice and then restore our attention on the object, on the breath, and then retain that